It didn't feel like a normal debut. From the moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field for warm-ups, there was an energy in the air, an almost tangible hum in the stadium that told everyone this wasn't going to be just another preseason footnote. Cleveland fans had shown up curious, maybe even cautiously optimistic, but by the time the night was over, they were on their feet screaming, fully converted into believers. Sanders didn't make a spectacle of himself before kickoff. He wasn't chest-thumping, pointing to the stands, or jawing with defenders during warm-ups. If anything, he looked like a guy who'd been here before.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
That calm, controlled demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the adrenaline-fueled chaos of a typical NFL debut. The cameras caught him laughing quietly with his receivers, loosening his shoulders, checking his wristband. No jitters, no deer-in-the-headlights look, just a quarterback ready to get to work. The first series set the tone. The Browns' play-calling leaned conservative at first, giving him a couple of short completions to settle in. But even in those basic plays, you could see the details, quick reads, tight footwork, and passes placed exactly where only his receivers could get them. He didn't rush, didn't force throws into tight windows just to prove he had the arm. He was playing chess, not checkers. Then came the first big test. 3rd and 8, the pocket collapsing, a linebacker free off the edge. Sanders didn't panic. He stepped up, slid to his left, and fired a dart to Amari Cooper for a first down. It wasn't the flashiest play of the night, but it was the kind that made veterans on the sideline nod and mutter, "Yeah, this kid's got it." From there, the rhythm only grew. On his second drive, Sanders orchestrated an 11-play march that ended with his first NFL touchdown, a perfectly timed back-shoulder throw in the corner of the end zone. He didn't celebrate wildly, just jogged back to the sideline with a small grin, greeted by a swarm of teammates who were starting to realize they weren't just playing alongside another rookie. What stood out wasn't just the throws, it was the way he commanded the huddle. Every snap, he was the calmest person in the room. Receivers talked afterward about how his voice never wavered, how he could crack a quick joke before a play to keep the energy light, then instantly flip the switch into execution mode. That kind of composure doesn't come from raw talent alone. It comes from years of preparation and a deep trust in your own process. Deion Sanders Jr. summed it up perfectly in a post-game interview when asked if he was surprised by Shedeur's success. Surprised? No. We expected this. The people who are shocked are the ones who weren't paying attention. It was a sentiment echoed by others close to him, coaches from his college days, teammates from summer workouts, even family friends who'd watched him grind since high school. This wasn't a fluke performance. It was the visible tip of an iceberg made of years of discipline. Analysts had plenty to say, too. Oinko, one of the more respected voices breaking down quarterback play, pointed out that Sanders' performance wasn't about 1 or 2 highlight throws. It was about a full game of correct decisions. "A lot of rookies come in and give you flashes," he said. "What Shedeur gave you was stability. That's way harder to fake." Skip Bayless, never one to avoid a sharp take, took it even further, blasting NFL front offices, especially the Browns, for letting Sanders slide in the draft. "You passed on him because you couldn't see past the name on his jersey," Bayless said on his show. "And now he's making you pay for it." His point wasn't subtle. Sanders wasn't just winning games, he was proving people wrong in a way that was almost poetic. Coach Kevin Stefanski, ever cautious with his words, praised Sanders' poise and leadership after the game, but stopped short of crowning him the starter. "It's one game," Stefanski said. "We're building something here, and Shedeur's part of that. He knows the work isn't done." It was classic coach speak, but even that couldn't hide the excitement in his voice. And then there was the subtext, because in the NFL, there's always subtext. Some critics still saw Sanders through the lens of politics, race, and perception. The whispers about whether he fit certain molds of leadership, whether his confidence would be mistaken for arrogance, whether he'd get the same leash as other quarterbacks. But that's the thing about undeniable performances. They have a way of quieting those whispers. Even those who wanted to cling to their preconceived notions had to admit, the kid could play. When Sanders addressed the media afterward, he didn't spike the ball on his critics. He spoke about consistency, about leading his teammates, about staying even-keeled through the highs and lows. One game doesn't define anything, he said. It's about stacking days, stacking wins, and being the same guy no matter what's going on around you. Emmanuel Acho, breaking down the game on a late-night segment, highlighted Sanders' versatility as the real story. You can't pigeonhole this guy, Acho said. He can beat you from a pocket, he can extend plays, he can check into a better look pre-snap, and he's not rattled by pressure. That's a full toolkit. The numbers backed it up. Over 200 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 turnovers. But the stats only told part of the story. What mattered more was the feeling in the stadium. The way fans who'd spent years cycling through quarterbacks were suddenly daring to believe again. There was a buzz in Cleveland that night, the kind you only get when you think you might have just seen the start of something special. And make no mistake, this debut was a statement. It wasn't loud or brash. It didn't need to be. The calm, controlled way Sanders handled his business spoke louder than any viral moment could. For a city that's been burned by false hope before, that kind of quiet confidence felt like the real deal. In the days that followed, the footage of his game-winning drive was replayed endlessly, on sports shows, on social media, in highlight reels that fans were already editing to music. Kids were mimicking his throwing motion in parks. Jerseys with his name were selling faster than the team shop could restock them. But Sanders didn't get caught up in the noise. On Monday morning, while sports talk shows were still dissecting his every throw, he was back in the facility at 6:30 a.m., running through film with the coaching staff. That's the part people close to him always point to, the refusal to see any game, even one this good, as anything other than a starting point. That's why his debut felt different. It wasn't just about the yards or the touchdowns. It was about the way he carried himself before, during, and after the game. It was about proving that the years of work, the long practices, the mental preparation, and the lessons learned from every challenge had built something sturdy enough to handle the spotlight. And if this was just the first chapter, Cleveland and the rest of the league might want to get used to seeing Shedeur Sanders' name at the top of the headlines. Because this didn't feel like a one-off. This felt like the start of a career that could bend the NFL conversation for years to come. The week after Shedeur Sanders' debut felt less like a normal stretch between games and more like the days following a cultural event. Cleveland wasn't just talking about football, they were talking about him. Taxi drivers had opinions. Coffee shop baristas debated whether his calm demeanor came from discipline or just unshakable confidence. At local high schools, kids were showing up to practice with taped-on 2S on their jerseys, imitating his number. It was strange how fast the energy shifted. Before that game, Sanders had been viewed as a curiosity. Promising, yes, but also a question mark. He'd been drafted in the 5th round, labeled as a project, a player who might need a year or two to develop behind veterans. He was, in the eyes of some, a future backup with a famous last name. One game later, the conversation was about when, not if, he would take over the starting job. Inside the Browns facility, the change was even more noticeable. In film sessions, his teammates were locked in when he spoke. Receivers leaned forward when he explained how he'd read a coverage. Offensive linemen were asking him about timing and cadence. It wasn't forced, it was respect earned through execution. Sanders' leadership style was never about volume. He didn't bark at teammates or slam helmets. He led by example, by knowing the playbook inside and out, by getting reps in after practice, and by never letting his body language sag even when things went wrong. In that debut game, the Browns had a couple of stalled drives early. Many rookies would have tightened up or forced throws. Sanders just adjusted. Shorter routes, quicker releases, a trust in the check down until the defense opened up downfield. It's a kind of poise that made defensive leaders like Myles Garrett tell reporters, "You can't teach that. You either have that calm under fire or you don't." But while Cleveland was buzzing, the national media was scrambling to adjust. A week earlier, panels on sports networks had devoted maybe a minute or two to Sanders, usually in segments about the Browns' quarterback uncertainty or long-term projects. Now, he was getting full segments. Analysts who had brushed off his college tape were dissecting his footwork frame by frame. Others were trying to claim they'd seen this coming, despite ignoring him all offseason. And of course, there were still holdouts, the voices insisting that it was just one game, and warning Cleveland not to crown him too early. Sanders didn't mind. In fact, his post-game interview hinted that he welcomed the skepticism. "If people doubt me, that's fine," he said with a shrug. "It just gives me more to work for." That mentality came from somewhere deeper than football. Those who knew him best said it was baked into his upbringing. Being Deion Sanders' son meant living under a microscope from the moment he picked up a football. Every success was dismissed as privilege, every misstep magnified. But instead of running from that pressure, Shedeur embraced it. He learned to turn noise into fuel, to out-prepare everyone in the room, to make the kind of steady, mistake-free plays that speak louder than any rebuttal. That's why, even with the city treating his debut like a coronation, Sanders didn't let his routine change. Tuesday morning, while some of his teammates were still recovering, he was in the facility before sunrise. He was already going through the Panthers tape, not to watch the highlights, but to review the plays that didn't work. Missed reads, slight underthrows, a red zone audible he wished he'd called sooner. "You can't get caught reading your own press," he told a teammate. "You start believing you've arrived. You stop getting better." Coach Kevin Stefanski noticed. "He's not chasing the applause," Stefanski told the media midweek. "He's chasing improvement." That's what you want in a quarterback. The veteran QBs in the room noticed, too. Even Dillon Gabriel, who'd been competing with Sanders for reps all summer, admitted in a rare candid moment, "The kid's locked in. He doesn't take shortcuts." You can't help but respect that. Meanwhile, Cleveland's fan base was experiencing something it hadn't felt in years. Hope without hesitation. They'd seen quarterbacks flash potential before, only to flame out. But something about Sanders' approach, the combination of talent, discipline, and total absence of panic, felt different. Fans weren't just buying jerseys, they were buying into the idea that he could be the guy. Local businesses were already capitalizing. Restaurants were naming sandwiches after him. A bakery downtown launched a Sanders special donut with brown and orange icing. Social media was flooded with clips from his debut, some set to dramatic movie soundtracks, others edited into highlight montages with captions like "QB1 is here." But while the city was celebrating, Sanders was already preparing for the next challenge. His second game would be on the road, in a stadium known for its noise and hostile crowds. It would be his first taste of facing an opponent that had watched his tape and built a game plan specifically to stop him. The true test of a young quarterback isn't the debut. It's what comes after, when defenses adjust and you have to counterpunch. In practice, Sanders was sharper than ever. He asked coaches to simulate crowd noise during huddle calls. He drilled 2-minute offense until it was automatic. He stayed late with receivers to fine-tune route adjustments against disguised coverages. Even defensive players started hanging around to watch, just to see how he processed plays in real time. Former NFL QB and current analyst Chris Sims, who visited Brown's camp that week, left impressed. "He's got that thing you can't measure," Sims said on his podcast. "It's not just the arm talent. It's the way the whole team carries itself when he's in the huddle. That's rare for a rookie." Off the field, Sanders kept the same low-key confidence that had defined his debut week. He wasn't chasing endorsement deals or photo shoots, though they were pouring in. He politely declined most, choosing instead to focus on building credibility with his teammates. He knew that in the NFL, the locker room's belief is more valuable than any headline. When game day finally arrived, it was clear the buzz from his debut hadn't faded. Opposing fans booed him during warm-ups, a sign they already saw him as a threat. The first quarter was rough, 2 3-and-outs, a couple of near sacks, a drop pass on third down. But instead of unraveling, Sanders stayed steady. He adjusted protections, changed tempos, and by the second half, the offense was moving again. Even though the Browns didn't win that game, Sanders' composure under adversity impressed the veterans. "It's easy to lead when you're up by 2 scores, one lineman said afterward. "It's a lot harder when you're trailing in a loud stadium and the pass rush is coming. He never blinked. That's when Cleveland started to realize they weren't just watching a hot start. They were watching the foundation of a leader being built in real time. Sanders wasn't a quarterback who needed everything to go right to succeed. He was one who could weather the inevitable storms of an NFL season without losing himself in the process. The rest of the league was watching, too. Defensive coordinators began mentioning him in press conferences. Analysts started slotting him into future franchise QB discussions. And the chatter about his draft slide turned into a constant refrain of how did so many teams miss on this guy. By mid-season, Sanders had strung together enough consistent performances to silence even his loudest critics. He wasn't perfect, no rookie is, but he was reliable. He was smart with the football. He could take a hit and still deliver a strike. And, perhaps most importantly, he had the respect of the locker room. In a sport where perception can shape opportunity, that was everything. And it's why, even with the political noise and the lingering doubts from certain corners of the league, Sanders' rise felt inevitable. His debut hadn't been a fluke. It had been the first page of a story that Cleveland, and maybe the entire NFL, would be telling for years. By the midpoint of the season, the novelty of Shedeur Sanders' emergence had worn off, but the respect had only deepened. The Browns' locker room no longer talked about him as the rookie QB. He was simply the quarterback. There was no sense of tiptoeing around his role or questioning whether he could handle the pressure. He'd already proved that, week after week, through a steady mix of smart decisions and flashes of brilliance. The players closest to him often said the same thing. His real gift wasn't just his arm, but his temperament. He didn't ride the emotional roller coaster that can derail young quarterbacks. He could throw a touchdown and look exactly the same as if he'd just taken a sack. That wasn't detachment, it was discipline. Sanders had learned early on that the NFL rewards players who can keep their heads steady through the highs and lows, and he lived by that rule every snap. One afternoon after practice, offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt summed it up best to a group of reporters. When you call a play for Shedeur, you know it's going to be run exactly how you designed it. He's not guessing out there. If the defense takes something away, he moves on to the next read. That's rare in a young quarterback. It wasn't just the coaching staff noticing. Other teams' defenders, even the ones tasked with stopping him, were starting to speak openly about his game. After facing the Browns in Week 9, a veteran safety from the opposing team admitted, "He's tricky, man. He doesn't lock onto receivers, and you can't bait him into bad throws." For a rookie, that's scary. Still, Sanders was the first to point out that he wasn't flawless. In a mid-season press conference, after a game where he'd thrown his first interception in weeks, he didn't blame the route or the protection. "That's on me," he said. "I got greedy when I should have taken what the defense gave me. You clean it up, learn, and move on." That accountability only made his teammates rally around him more. Wide receiver Amari Cooper explained it during a radio appearance. "When your quarterback owns his mistakes, it makes everyone else want to do the same. He's setting the tone without even trying to." Off the field, Sanders kept a surprisingly quiet profile for someone who'd become the face of a franchise. Sure, the endorsement offers kept rolling in. Sports drinks, apparel companies, even a local car dealership wanted him for ads. But he picked his spots. If it wasn't something he genuinely liked or used, he passed. "People can tell when you're faking it," he told a teammate. "I'd rather do less and keep it real." This approach only strengthened his connection with fans. In Cleveland, authenticity is currency, and Sanders had it in spades. He wasn't trying to be a celebrity. He was trying to be a quarterback who delivered wins. And, in a city that had seen too many false dawns, that focus was refreshing. The turning point in his rookie season came during a cold, late November home game against a division rival. The Browns were down by 4 with under 2 minutes left, no timeouts, and 80 yards to go. It was the kind of moment that can turn a quarterback into a legend, or expose him. From the first snap of that drive, Sanders was in complete command. He hit short routes to move the chains, worked the sidelines to stop the clock, and when the defense finally crept up, dropped a 27-yard strike over the middle to set up a red zone shot. With less than 20 seconds on the clock, he rolled out to his right, evaded a blitzing linebacker, and found his tight end in the back of the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. The stadium erupted. Fans who'd been clutching their scarves in the freezing wind were suddenly roaring, hugging strangers, and chanting his name. It was more than just a win. It was a moment Cleveland fans would talk about for years. In the post-game locker room, Sanders' reaction was telling. While his teammates celebrated, he quietly sat with his play sheet, circling notes and making small marks. When a reporter asked what he was doing, he smiled and said, "Just making sure I remember what worked and what didn't." You don't want to waste a drive like that. You want to know how to do it again. That single quote made headlines the next day. Analysts praised his mindset, pointing out that many rookies would have been basking in the glory. But Sanders was already focused on repeating the success. It was a glimpse into why his growth had been so rapid. He didn't treat big moments as accidents. He treated them as blueprints. As the season pushed toward its final stretch, the playoff chatter started. Cleveland, which had looked like a middle-of-the-pack team in August, was suddenly in the hunt, thanks in no small part to the stability Sanders brought to the offense. His numbers weren't gaudy, but they were efficient. High completion percentage, low turnovers, steady yardage. He wasn't chasing stats, he was chasing wins. In team meetings, veterans began leaning on him for input. In huddles, players hung on his calls. In practices, the energy picked up when he was under center. These weren't just signs of respect. They were signs that the Browns had finally found the quarterback who could be their cornerstone. Even the critics, who'd been slow to acknowledge his rise, were coming around. One national columnist, who'd previously called Sanders a nice backup with upside, wrote a mid-season piece titled, "I Was Wrong About Shedeur Sanders." In it, he admitted that Sanders' football IQ and decision-making were far beyond what he'd expected. Through it all, Sanders kept the same even keel. Asked about the article, he shrugged. "If people change their minds, cool. If they don't, that's fine too. I'm not here to win arguments. I'm here to win games." It was that mentality, paired with his skill set, that made the Browns' front office start thinking beyond the season. Extension talks weren't on the table yet, but internally, there was a sense that they were building around him, not just for next year, but for the long haul. And as for Sanders, he still drove the same car he had in college. He still spent extra hours in the film room. He still texted his receivers late at night with ideas for routes and adjustments. For all the noise outside the building, inside it, he was just the same calm, unshakable quarterback who'd walked into his debut months earlier and quietly changed the trajectory of a franchise. By then, the question wasn't if he was the Browns' future. It was how far that future could go. And in Cleveland, for the first time in a long time, that question felt exciting instead of exhausting.